Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Museum of Art and Photography. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the lecture, Posters as Historical Record, with G. Arunima, a professor at the Center for Women's Studies at JNU. She will lead us through an insightful exploration of the Indian women's movement as captured through its vibrant posters. For over a century, posters have been a powerful tool in India's visual landscape, from cinema advertisements to the promotion of social causes. The Zuban Poster Women Archive stands out by documenting the rich, multifaceted history of the women's movement in India. Featured in the Frames of Struggle, Tracing a Movement series, these posters highlight the variety of regions, issues, and voices that have shaped women's activism, emphasizing that no cause is too small to be considered a woman's issue. In this talk, we will delve into how this visual archive and other poster material offer valuable insights into women's struggles, their political agency, and their role in shaping India's history of resistance. We are delighted to have Professor Arunima here to share her extensive knowledge on the subject. A brief intro about her. She is a professor at the Center for Women's Studies at JNU New Delhi and is a historian by training. She has researched and published on both the historical and contemporary contexts of Kerala and wider India, focusing particularly on cultural, visual, and material texts, and rethinking the politics of the contemporary. Her publications include There Comes Papa, Colonialism and the Transformation of Matriliny in Kerala, Malabar, The Hijab, Islam, Women and the Politics of Clothing, Love and Revolution in the 20th Century Colonial and Post-Colonial World, Perspectives from South Asia and Southern Africa, as well as many more publications. Today I would also like to thank our ISL interpreters, Shivam and Harshita. And before I hand over, just a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your phones on silent for the duration of the session. And we'll have a Q&A towards the end of the session where you can respond and ask questions to the speaker. I'll now hand over to Arunima. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Much gratitude to Mehreen and Brian, who invited me to speak on this extraordinary archive that's been put together by Zuban, which is a feminist publisher, and has various kinds of publications, and also now this fascinating archive. And I will begin by showing you not a very well taken screenshot that I took this morning of the archive webpage. And I would strongly suggest that most of you who are here probably are interested in this should go and have a look at the archive itself. I mean, it's a easily navigable pull-down menu, and it's not difficult to actually look at the kind of range of material that they have. So that itself is an eye-opener for any number of reasons, both aesthetic and political. So I think it'd be really good. And also because Zuban is so interesting and you can look at other things as well, but do look at the poster archive. At least, I think 80% of you were with the walkthrough that was done by Lakshmi Murthy and Archesha Rai, and I'm so thrilled I could be here for a walkthrough that was done by Lakshmi and Archesha. The exhibition is extraordinary. It's the second iteration of the Zuban collective, Zuban's visual archive collection. But it was also interesting to listen to the kinds of issues that they raised. I have to say that I also didn't know, in fact, until Maureen had written to me that this is the second iteration. I hadn't realized that Museum of Art and Photography had done a first iteration. So I'm really thrilled. I didn't realize that there were still museums and galleries left in the country that were interested in feminist art making, feminist poster making, feminist resistance. So, so 3 cheers to MAP for that. So it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling to be here for that. Could we have the first slide? Yes, now that's the web page. And if you go and you put poster women into your Google searches and so on and so forth, you will find this slide, this page opening up, and then you can do the pull down and so on. Now, there are various kinds of questions about the movement itself. Movements, I think it's correct to pluralize. There is no one Indian women's movements because India is vast and varied. The kinds of questions that have been raised from different parts of the country have been very different. Sometimes voices that have been more amplified for predictable reasons have been those from the metro cities, from people who can at least navigate 2 languages and have had a greater public presence. Having said which, I think this archive is quite fascinating because it actually, I'm moved that there are so many posters from small groups that have been collected. And the fact that these posters exist means that these groups existed. And the fact that these groups existed means that in whatever way or shape, there were struggles that were going on, there were questions that were going on, there were discussions that were going on. So I think it's important to bear that in mind when we look at an archive of this kind, an exhibition of this kind, because it is not telling you a uniform or unitary or one story. It's very rich, very textured and layered, and this is an entry point. But for me, as a student of history and also somebody who's interested in visual material and material culture generally, posters are very, very interesting for all manners of reasons. And one of the main reasons why posters are important and interesting is because posters actually are very, what shall we say, they're timely. They are time-bound, right? They're made for particular reasons, right? And we are looking at political posters here, but it's important to, I'm going to move this a bit because that light is coming into my left eye, so there's a part of me that's going slightly blind in this eye. So I think it's important to bear that in mind when one looks at it, because when you relocate any kind of visual material, particularly something like a political poster, into a gallery space, I think it's extremely important to have an exhibition of this kind, and even more so to have an archive of this kind. It's important because it allows people of different walks of life, different generations, different parts of the country, to at least get an exposure to some of the kinds of themes that are addressed here, right? And to also move back in time and think about a different kind of India, a different kind of political landscape, where political struggles, bodies on the streets were not uncommon, right? Dissent in its manifold forms existed in this country, and at least those of us who are grey-haired here certainly remember that and perhaps were part of those in one way or another. Right? I will, towards the end of the few things I want to say here today, I will return to this question of archives and archiving very briefly. But at the outset, I know that Lakshmi in her introduction did speak about this, that, the numbers are around 2,000 or a little more, they're growing. I remember reading some time ago that, when the initial process of collection was taking place, and I'm sure she will correct me if I'm wrong, many posters came in pretty, the condition was very poor, naturally, because you see, you have to remember that posters are, they are made by groups which had no money. They were made on all kinds of paper. Everything wasn't, printed beautifully, and there weren't large numbers. There are many such questions which I will speak about a little bit here. But then they were photographed and, printed again, and, so a process, there's a new layer, as it were, that's added to the original posters that were collected, right? So a certain other kind of, what shall we say, today we are speaking about care and solidarity, but that is also an act of care and solidarity. It's about, caring about one's past, caring about histories of resistance, caring about feminist past. So I think it's important to bear that in mind when one thinks about how this process might have been done. And when I haven't had much time, unfortunately, to work with this material. So and I can completely understand the kinds of absences there are. And to my mind, at least, this is and should be a collective process in which those of us who are concerned about these kinds of issues should volunteer some time freely in order to be able to add as much information as possible. I did, in the couple of weeks that I had, I tried to call friends and chat with them about, how posters were made and so on and so forth, and did you think about the slogan first, did you think about the image first, was it a collective process? Because when you think about poster making, and for those of you who have had some history of political activism, my own involvement in more direct and involved ways have been with anti-communal groups like the Sampradayika Virodhi Andolan and the People's Movement for Secularism and so on. I must say that we were lurching from one crisis to another, which is probably true for large numbers of women's groups, many of whom I know, and many of whom are friends. So, I think this is something that one also does need to bear in mind, which is that the very early posters, shall we say, and I have, I have chosen in the beginning some from today's collection, which some of you have already seen, but I just wanted to speak to some of the issues that have come up, for me at least, from those posters, just as a kind of small illustration. And then I have some posters which I myself have taken photographs of, and there's one which I made a very long time ago. So that was a little bit of conceit, needless, but I thought, let me put it in there. It's kind of funny to have one's own poster in there as well. Now, it's important that when you look at this collection, I cannot emphasize this enough. There are groups from all over the country. And this is something that is very, very important to remember at a political time in this country's history, where it's not that bodies are not on the ground. It's not that there aren't people who are not physically present, doing all manners of things on streets and elsewhere and so on. It's just that those people aren't the kinds of people who are resisting structures of power, who are resisting the establishment, who are resisting forms of state oppression, who are resisting patriarchies of different kind. We do not. There is shrinking smaller and smaller space for such kinds of groups to be actually physically present. So we think that that's gone. But there are other kinds of bodies on the ground. There are other kinds of posters that we see. Some of which, at least from Kerala, I have been trying to document for the last few years. And it is scary, but it is also very significant given this kind of history of almost lack of money that alternative groups, resistant groups have had. There is huge amount of money now, so the kinds of posters that you will see are very glossy and very, very well printed, and there is something about poster histories which actually opens up, I think, very important issues knows about all of this. But I think it is also significant about this archive particularly, let's go back to this, and the issues raised here, which is it's not just the diversity of groups and the different places where groups existed, but also how difficult these issues were. The kinds of issues that have confronted women always. And it's not as though these things have gone away. And it's not as though these fights don't continue. They take new forms, the ways of resistance have changed. We have younger women protesting in new kinds of ways. And I think there is great need to also acknowledge that. And as I was saying to Brian earlier today, I find it quite nice that for a younger generation of feminists, humor is something that they are, Indian feminists that is, humor is something that they are using, and I'm very happy about that because I think we were all rather poor-faced and serious. So it's nice to have something different there. So, in other words, I think one of the kinds of issues that we have to think about is, when we say, what is a women's issue, right? Everything is a women's issue, right? And this archive is testimony to that. You will find that there are posters from any number of kinds of themes and any number of kinds of issues have been addressed in this, whether it's education, safety, the right to life and dignity and livelihood, to the environment, to communalism, to building solidarities, to health, to literacy, political participation, huge battles against violence and all manners of things. But the difference is this, that the minute you start addressing these questions from a feminist perspective, your understanding of power itself changes, right? So this is something that I can speak to from personal experience, which is that when you have discussions within women's groups about communalism, it would be of a certain kind. But when you have discussions about communalism within groups which do not self-identify as women's groups, they are very different in tenor and the kinds of issues that are emphasized or the questions that are raised. And I will come back to this because I think there are two groups here, one, both of whom, have had a very, very significant presence in relation to these themes, which I do want to speak to. And I will open up those. So how should we see or think, and I'm not going to speak much about iconography or the kinds of images that have been used and so on. So I just want to speak about the thematics and the ways in which these have been addressed. So if we can have the next slide, please. Now, what is, for me, the reason I chose this slide as one that I wanted to show was because it says, तुम बढ़ो सागर के ज्वार की तरफ बढ़ो और दफन कर आओ तमाम जुल्मों से तम सात समंदर पार बिटावन में. And it says, and the translation is, move forward like the waves of the ocean, go and bury any injustice, oppression in the wilderness beyond the seven seas. Now, what struck me is that this poster, now, when we work with this kind of material and speaking as a historian here, it would have been useful had I had the year, that certainly would have been of help. If I had known a little bit more about the group that had made it and so on. And what that tells me is that work like this cannot be done unless and until one also has a rich and textured ethnography of the women's movements all over the country in its different forms and the kinds of groups that came up at different periods, right? We must also remember that the 70s and 80s and 90s were periods in the history of this country where there were any number of other militancies that were ongoing, right? There were battles about land, there were battles about Adivasi rights, there were battles about different forms of social and economic injustice. All of these were ongoing at this time. There were many, many different groups. So there is a certain kind of conversation between groups and movements. Movements form in those ways. So the women's movement is not something, or the other movements, those are a little bit more to my mind, sort of closed off from the women's movement, but the women's movements and groups were very open and responsive to this and deeply self-reflexive. So there's a lot of course correction that has taken place within the women's movement itself over a period of time, because there have been so many difficult questions that have been asked, be it on questions of caste or questions of religion. None of these things have come together seamlessly. There have been huge fights, and I see fights as a sign of growth. I do not see these as disempowering. I see these as critical. Unless you can have the space and have the ability to differ, there is no way in which you will rethink or be able to evolve a new kind of politics. And I think this is something that, at least for me, has been very important. And looking at these posters reminded me of how important that is. Could we have the next slide, please? Now again, the name of the group itself is quite significant, Shramjeevi Mahila Samiti. And Lakshmi told us a little bit about the history of this. Now, but I think it is, what it says that we will not accept these shackles. Oh no, Archija did, I'm sorry. We will not accept these chains, right? There is, I think, in the histories of iconographical shifts that one might actually find, we may find a certain kind of, what shall we say, visual consonance between images that we may have seen, let's say, in other posters. And Archija said, and I found that quite interesting, that there is a kind of, at least she sees a kind of influence of an earlier kind of Soviet-style poster sort of iconography within this. These are things that one does need to research far more. I would want to research far more closely. But I also think that it is very, very interesting that a group that was called a women's workers collective, right, Shramjeevi Mahila Samiti, is actually raising these kinds of issues. Again, the year is missing, but I imagine this is sometime in the 80s. And from Calcutta, and it also undoes, and if one is to put it, and perhaps that is the kind of way in which at least researchers who could contribute to this could work with, say, material of this kind, which is to put it in and alongside other, let's say, workers' posters that were produced at that time, right? And then one would get a sense of what conversations are going on, what kinds of visual and political conversations are actually going on in this period. And I think that's something that one must take on quite seriously. Could we have the next slide, please? Again, this is quite self-evident. Again, Archija spoke about this. But I chose this and the next slide, please. Because they are, from Udaipur. It's very interesting. They are part of the Saksharata Abhiyan. They are part of the literacy campaign. And visually, they are very different from one another. It's very interesting how, each of these, and they're both very compelling visually, but they're not identical at all. They're quite different from one another. But I like the second one particularly because it says that love reaches every home when women read together, right? And you have a kind of formation, a women's sort of togetherness, which normally one would have seen around, let's say, food or something else. And if one is to also sort of, make just a sort of wild guess. I mean, it's also sort of, there's a kind of Shergill kind of memory in this, not necessarily that the artist was aware of that, but those are, they give you a very different kind of affective sense, whereas these women sitting together, the woman with the book up, it's a very, very interesting kind of sense of the house behind and the women outside, sitting outside and reading together. And they're both from Rajasthan. Now, the tragedy of the kinds of histories of, shall we say, education in this country and literacy in this country is that it is deeply uneven. And it's not as though we have a highly literate population in Rajasthan even today. But to me, it is extremely important that as early as probably the 80s, again in both of these the year is missing and we have to go and hunt for that, maybe even the 90s, it is important that literacy campaigns were being taken up very seriously. I know students who have come from Rajasthan to universities like JNU who have spoken very passionately about the fact that it was with great difficulty that they made it to their schools, and for this generation of students, a lot of them actually went to Saraswati Shishru Mandirs. They studied there. So, which is to say, they went to the RSS schools, somehow managed to go to college. They would have had one or two good teachers who would have pushed them. And then coming to spaces like JNU or other public universities allowed them options in terms of, not in terms of life options or what they would do, but in terms of political choices, in terms of new visions, in ways in which they have unthought their own kind of early formation, the way in which they were educated. And I think as somebody who has been in education for far too long, and as an educator as well, I find this deeply, deeply important, and I think this is something that we do have to continue to raise as a very, very important feminist issue, because the first and foremost thing about education is that education allows you the right to question, it allows you the voice to question, it gives you language, right? And far more than literacy, that is actually what changes you in some ways. Next slide, please. This is, one, of course, it's from Hyderabad, it's from Asmita. This is a image which is, in some senses so evocative and self-explanatory. But I think it is also a statement about the histories of this country and the politics of certain places. So I think that, when we associate, say, Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra and places like that with very, very militant caste movements, we also must remember that places like Hyderabad produced a new criticality in terms of a new way of rethinking religion in the social life of people and the social life of politics. And this is an image and a poster which really moved me. I thought it was very important. I'm thrilled that it is actually, restored and it's been included in this collection and this exhibition. The right to have, the presence of women within the parliament is essential, to say the least. And, one of the things, perhaps, I think it's important to also remember that whatever the differences between different kinds of groups within the autonomous women's movement, but also outside of it, the sort of women's wings of at least the left parties and the supposedly progressive left parties of the country, this was a demand that was actually being discussed at a certain time. And at least two states that I can speak to with some confidence in terms of knowing a little bit about them. One is my own Kerala and the other is Himachal. I will say this, that Himachal has had a very different history of women's presence generally in social life and a presence, a visibility, which in Kerala certainly wasn't the case. And I think the Panchayati Raj inclusiveness transforms that and radicalizes women in an interesting way. So I think there are interesting kinds of issues that posters do open up. Posters of this kind, I think, are worth going back to again, going back to issues again. Maybe we do need to rethink some of all of this. Next, please. Can we have this and the next two, and then I will speak to all of them. And the next. And can we go back to the Sahir poster? I wanted to include, again, Lakshmi spoke about this, and I want to go back to both the Sahir and the Steps posters for, amongst other things, certain important kinds of shifts and changes in the politics of this country, in the politics of the movements of this country, in the kinds of critical voices that have slowly started finding a certain kind of presence. Now, the Sahir poster, which has a far more gentler visual and tonal quality, which says, "Insaniyat ka dharm nibhana, saath milkar behno samna karo," which is to say that embrace the religion of humanity and face the world together. Now, if you look at the Women's Jamaat, the Steps posters, and I don't know, at least a few of you might remember the big, so what shall we call, the sort of smear campaign against Sharifa Khanum, who started Steps. And Lakshmi mentioned invoking justice. We were very lucky that Deepa was in Delhi soon after it was made, and she screened it for us in our center, and we screened it in JNU. But at that time, there was a huge amount of writing about her. There was an immense amount of abuse that she faced for the kinds of questions about, Muslim women's sort of political and pious subjectivity, let's put it that way, that she was raising. Now, in the Sahir case, Trupti Shah also was a friend. So I wanted to bring these two together. One is from Gujarat, the other is from Pudukkottai, the other two. And these are particularly poignant for me because they speak, as it were, from two different kinds of dimensions, two ends of the spectrum of one thing which you can bring together, which is they are both asking in very different way what it means to be a Muslim woman in India. Soon after 2002, the Gujarat carnage, some of us had met in Hyderabad, and one of the kinds of things that women who came from Hyderabad, and particularly Sahir and so on, were speaking about was about the way in which, and which of course has become the new norm in this country, but was starting then in a very obvious kind of way, young Muslim men being disappeared, criminalized, tortured, and the way in which women in the family and women in the community were fighting for a space for sort of, fighting for all Muslims. Muslim women were fighting for all Muslims, and that was the kind of issue that was being raised by many of those women at that time, also in Hyderabad, but much more obviously from Gujarat and so on. Those were the kinds of voices. Now, if you actually look at the other end of the spectrum, the kind of movement started by Sharifa Khanum and the Steps kind of initiative, what we find, of course, is the way in which she is fighting for Muslim women's rights within the community, right? Equal rights and access to education, employment, but also to a life of dignity that included being pious, right? So that is the kind of sense. I mean, there's a way in which, if you actually look at the 70s and 80s, and even the decade, though of course things begin to shift, and from Bombay you get other kinds of debates and discussions happening, Hyderabad certainly, But the 90s through to the 2000s is the time when the question of religion is being addressed again and again and again by different kinds of women's groups in different ways. And there is a way in which giving voice to Muslim women becomes a very critical issue. And that cannot be, when we speak about Indian women, I mean, the fact of difference, the fact of location, the fact of, the way in which you are shaped by your life, your community, and the kinds of conditions under which you live in this country, that will shape your politics, right? And that begins to be voiced, I think, for the first time in such clear ways in the 90s, and these posters from the 2000s certainly speak about that. Could we have the other posters quickly so that I think we are... This is also part of the, we can continue. This already you have seen. I wanted to bring this because it's such a lovely small idea, Ek aur ek gyara. And I spoke to a friend in Jagori and she said that, Kamla had this very creative and what shall we say, active mind, and she was always thinking of slogans and so on and so forth and all of that, and Bindya could just sort of give visual form to anything that was told to her. So I think that's a really interesting combination, and this is such a striking picture, and the coming together, the addition becomes a circle of togetherness. Could we just have the next few, please? So we can go forward. You've seen some of these once again, and this I again some of this I brought particularly because I hadn't known about the skills workshop. I was really struck by the fact that Chandralekha, about whom I had known only as a dancer, had also conducted these workshops for activist groups. She, Sadanand Menon and Dashrath Patel had run these poster workshops, and I think that's also a different kind of political moment, a way in which poster workshops were being conducted. So it wasn't as though it was just, those of us without any kind of, we might have language, but certainly no artistic skills, were making slightly bad posters, but there were also really interesting posters being designed, and activists were being trained to think about how you could conceptualize and give form to certain radical militant ideas. And I certainly will go away and try and find out more about the skills workshop and other such workshops which were conducted for activists. Next, please. And the next. I brought both these. Can we go back to the previous one, please? Because in some ways, visually, without any text, and I think that is something that's worth reiterating in our country, which is that for the most part, people do not read or mightn't read text on posters, but visuals do work very powerfully. And this is such, you don't need any explanation for a poster of this kind. I think it's very, very clear that, you move from being mute to shouting. And I think that's a great way to express the kinds of possibilities that there were, the ways in which there was, imagining new futures is also about fighting structures of power. So some of these posters are also reminders of that. So we can move forward. And the next. And the next. Right. The last bit of this talk, which I think I've already taken too much time, but let me try and go through a few posters. I just want to give you a sense of where you find posters. So this question is rather big for me, and I'm sure for all of us, which is, were posters made for protests? Were they made for walls, for pasting on walls? Were they just kept within offices? Were they handmade? If you printed it, did you have the money to do so? Where did you get? How many copies did you print? I did ask the few friends I had a quick chat with, one from Saheli, one from Jagori, a friend who has been with different movements for a very long time, but not necessarily only women's groups. So everybody, I mean, the resounding reply from everyone which we know, those of us who are of a certain generation, is that there was no money. There was really no money at all. So it is very interesting about the fact that many of these posters are handmade posters taken out for protests. This is most probably a photograph by Sheba Chachi. I'm not 100% sure. Unfortunately, this is one of the photographs that I got without any provenance, without any details about where it's from. It's obviously Delhi. You can see that. But in front of the court. But other than that, it isn't clear to me which year specifically, who the photographer is, etc., etc. But it's very likely that it was Sheba Chachi's. So it is important also to think over and above the questions about images and texts and messages and so on and so forth, but also the histories of circulation of posters. Where do you find them? Who had them? And one of the things that my friend Kalyani Menon Sen from Jagori said to me is that, when subsequently some of these posters were also printed to be sold, so you can actually find them even in the UN and so on framed. So it's very interesting the travel of posters that might have had an originary life of a certain kind, which then ends up somewhere else, right? So there is something there that one does want to think about. Next, please. We will quickly pass over this. The only reason I put this in is this is the first poster I ever made. It was in 1983. It was made with my friend Kumkum Roy and another friend. The three of us had a three-woman, we were very young, and we had 3 paisa to rub between the three of us. But we somehow managed to rent Kidwai Nagar Community Hall for a whole day and at different events. This is actually a translation done by Kumkum Roy, who was one of the friends, from a piece by Christabel Pankhurst. We were very influenced by the suffragists at that time. There are nice things in it, say, like Pratna mat karo, bheek mat mango, reng ke mat chalo, and so on and so forth, and we were very happy about it. But it's just a needless bit of a personal history of poster making. But what I think when I look back at it, I see is the fact that this is on brown paper with, sketch pens, and that's what we had. Most groups had only this. We were not even a group. We were just a bunch of people who were trying to do something. So, next please. I have included now photographs from different protests that I have been part of. A lot of them are from Delhi, not all are from Delhi. Just to give you a sense of the way in which posters are handmade, are held up, are used. It's not just the physical body on the street, but also the poster. The poster itself is an actor. So I think it's important to think about the poster as a political actor. So I think it's interesting the kinds of things that this is from the first Pride March in Delhi in 2008. Next, please. Also from there, again, you can see that there is a way in which there's a coming together of issues. So this says Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, hetero, homo, bhai, bhai. So it is an interesting question of the way in which it brings into the same frame anti-communal and anti-homophobic kinds of sentiments. Next, please. This is from Cairo. I used to do some work with groups there. I had gone there just soon after Tahrir. And this is from one of the walls. Next, please. This is from Trivandrum, from the women's group Sakhi. But this was stuck up on their notice board. I just took a poster. It's for International Women's Day. So there were posters like this being made by different groups all over the country. Next, please. As many of you might know, this was a big protest conducted all over the country. The Trivandrum part of it was organized by me. And this was the poster that we had used everywhere. Next, please. And this was one of the posters from there with some people who had come saying, is animality, the essence of a human or an animal? I, of course, don't necessarily agree with the sentiment behind it. I think animals never are needlessly violent, humans are. So perhaps it's important to rethink the idea of humanity itself. But next, please. This is from the Teachers Association protest. The reason I brought this is because the extreme right corner, the last poster there, is about the way in which the Internal Complaints Committee replaced the gender sensitization and campaign against sexual harassment sort of unit that we had in JNU, which was the first of its kind in any university in this country. And the Teachers Association, because it had many women and many feminists in it, also felt that it was important to have a poster of this kind as part of the Teachers Association protest. Next, please. As you know, particularly friends in Bangalore, there were countrywide protests in support of Disha Ravi, who was a climate activist. And this, I think, is from Chandigarh, if I remember correctly. Next, please. And the next. Okay. Can we go back to the previous one? Both of these are photographs from the anti-CAA protests, and in which, as you know only too well, I didn't bring the Shaheen Bagh images because I think most people do know those very well, but there were large numbers of street marches and protests in which women in large numbers came out to protest, and I think this is something that we do need to remember. They are both from Delhi, they are both photographs that I took. Next. And the next. This is from Lebanon, from Beirut, where I had gone for a different meeting, but the walls were covered with the Israeli murder of the journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Next. And both in this country and the next, there were protests, in Beirut, there were protests against the murder of Mahsa Amini and moral policing. Can we come to the previous one? And in India, there were protests about, as we know, the big kind of attack on hijabi women in Bangalore to begin with, and then it had a life of its own once it went to the court. Next, please. And the next. I tried to talk to my old students who were part of Pinjra Tod. I couldn't speak to them, so I just brought this image. I think it's important because young women have produced new kinds of movements, Pinjra Tod being one amongst many of these. It started in a college campus in Delhi, and then it spread to many other parts of the country. This is from the Himachal University. This is a poster, and they were fighting against the kinds of unfair curfew laws on students, women students, and the ways in which their bodies were being policed. But I think it's also important to remember that Pinjra Tod then emerged as its political life grew. They started engaging with a range of issues. I remember many of them being very active in the protests after Una, and also, of course, as many of you know, in the anti-CAA protests. Next, please. this is just to give you a sense of, again, it was an exhibition of this kind, which some of us from the Kerala Council of Historical Research had curated in the Indian Association of Women's Studies, Trivandrum, a couple of years back. And friends from all over the country sent us posters and photographs and so on, and it was such an important, moment of connecting with people I personally had lost touch with for a while, and it was so interesting. And as Lakshmi said earlier, it is fascinating how much material does exist in our homes, in boxes and in cupboards and forgotten, and people started pulling those out. So it's, of course there is a very old archive of women's resistance, Sparrow, but many other groups and friends from all over the country sent us material, and this is just an image of that. Next, please. I thought I'd bring this because this was the time when my university was being cleansed of all posters and any kind of wall art. It was famous for graffiti and wall art, and a lot of students' politics could be seen. Years and decades of it. It was like a palimpsest. There were layers and layers of it that you could see. And some years ago, once the political dispensation changed, the then Vice Chancellor, I think he had an allergy to these, so he wanted the the walls cleaned. So he had them all wiped out and torn off, and it was all cleaned up. Next, please. But they're all back. So I thought it's nice that, we know that students, young people, they are the future. There is, that's stating the obvious. But they are also the ones who have been fighting some of the most difficult battles in this country. And I think it's on a day when we are thinking about women's exhibitions and women's protests and so on, we must also think back to the time of the 70s and 80s and 90s, when many of those women are older now, were very young then, right? So the young people have fought different kinds of battles. And college campuses and university campuses have shown enormous amount of courage and resilience and militancy, and I salute them for that. Next, please. And I thought you should see this because this is what you see everywhere. Like the JNU Vice Chancellor, this is the last image I have for you. I just have a few things to say to you about archiving and cleaning. So, I mean, as I had been saying all along, that in many ways, what we have from, say, the Zuban archive or from personal archives like the one that I shared with you, what we have is a sense of political activism in this country, around the world, networks that are made, issues that are raised, the kinds of groups, small and large, some which have had a longer lifespan, others which might have closed down. There are many, many condensed histories here, and I think it's the posters are a extraordinary invitation for us to begin to think about many issues around all of this, about questions about how groups came together, what kinds of discussions were held, whether they had money or whether they were self-funded, they always were. And sometimes one must also remember that there was a lot of, in this care and solidarity kind of argument. I know that, when we used to run this, we used the offices of ActionAid, and it happened because there was a lot of space sharing and resource sharing, and there was a lot of all of that also happened as well. Right? So I think it's important to also understand that the women's movements, democratic rights movements, movements for civil liberties, anti-communal politics, and groups of this kind have actually historically in this country shared resources. All these groups that are seen as part of a wider sort of, what today one would call citizens groups, which were part of autonomous political movements, autonomous, which is to say non-party affiliated political movements, the autonomous women's movements and so on and so forth. They came together and they managed in these kinds of ways. It could be in somebody else's office, it could be in somebody's living room, it could be on a barsati and so on and so forth and all of that. So there is, between the 70s to the 2000s, because of a combination of different kind of factors, including the vibrancy and militancy of the women's movement, the number of protests, groups, discussions, and differences, there were, these posters are actually signaling to all of that. And I think that is something that we have to bear in mind when we begin to think about these posters and we look at them. Right? These are an archive of these histories of struggle, interventions, and also self-reflexivity. And as I said earlier, course correction. So what is it about archiving? How do we think about archiving and so on, right? Now, I think particularly archives of resistance, and this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, which is that we do need to build it, and it's not easy. And as those of us who have tried a little bit of trying to archive anything know, it's extremely difficult. You have to piece all kinds of bits and pieces together. Sometimes there will be unfinished stories, but I don't think one should be put off by that. I think that is something that does need to be done, right? But archives of this kind, apart from being an archive of resistance, they are also an archive of the kind of varieties of Indian feminisms. Right? And I think that is something that we do need to think about. How did collectivities get formed? How were these groups coming together? And I think that this is a kind of, the archive is the place from where younger people who may not have been part of that movement will not just study this, but they will also gain inspiration. I was talking recently with a South African friend who lives in the UK, who has been involved in a lot of pro-Palestinian work and is utterly depressed about the ways in which that part of the world is, what shall we say, there is a way in which the erasure of Palestine and Gaza is so simple in that part of the world. But at the same time, there is also a reminder that we do need to keep dreams alive. We do need to have utopias. We do need to have something to look forward to. And archives actually are a way of looking to the past to look to the future. They're a way of going back and learning it. As a student of history, I certainly can say this, that unlike that idiotic thing which is, history repeats itself, which is always repeated all the time, you also learn enormously about courage, about resilience, about strategy, about the way in which people made quite a lot out of very small sets of things. And pushbacks do not all come together in one sort of happy collectivity. Things happen in little bits and pieces. They happen in different places. There are different kinds of time spans over which these things happen. I think these are things that we have to bear in mind. And at the same time, we also have to, particularly for those of us who are concerned about these histories of resistance, there's a way in which we need to contribute in order to actually collectively perhaps fill in the blanks here. Now, for me, some of the dates would have mattered, some of the details of the groups, I certainly will try. And now that I've, started thinking, I've been working with posters from the other side of the spectrum, the Hindutva ones, which I've been documenting. But now that I've started looking at this and this archive more seriously, I think there is a way in which I personally will start talking to as many friends as possible in order to start building those informal ethnographies, which are also equally, and actually the Zuban website does have some interviews, but I'm sure they will need as many people as possible to help them with this. So I think we do need to understand histories of printing, costs, circulation, and any number of things of this kind in order to make the archive viable and complete. Right? So this is a collective project. I think it is something that inspires that. Now, about cleaning walls and no poster kind of bills that we see, the first and foremost thing, and this is of course very, very obvious, but it has been that much more obvious in recent times, there is a great fear of the political. And when I say that, I mean there is a great fear in this country of politics of dissent, right? Politics of difference, right? And the thing about the poster is that it forces you to see something. You cannot unsee it once you've seen it. You may not like it, but you've seen it, right? So you don't want it there, right? The reason why you pull those things down is precisely because you want to actually pretend, and there is a way in which there is a kind of one of the kinds of symptoms, shall we say, of majoritarian populisms is that they are very, very status quoist, and they are very comfortable with what is actually happening, right? So other than being symptomatic of an immensely growing amount of intolerance in this country, it's also just the sheer fear of seeing somebody or seeing something that thinks, that looks like you, but thinks differently. You think that you might hear very similar kinds of views, but might say something totally opposite to that. All right? So on that happy note, let me stop here. Thank you so much.
A big thank you to Arunima for that really engaging session. We'll now open the floor to questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll come up to you.
Okay, hi, my name is Keshav. Thank you so much for this. My name is Keshav. I visited Delhi once and I visited the JNU campus. I come from Christ University, so for me this was a completely different world. So I'm truly inspired by the university itself and the place that you work. My questions are of twofold. One is when I did read about posters as historical record, my first immediate thought was political posters that either political parties of a place put up in their areas, or local community groups put up in their areas as a way to, let's say, they say this is Ganesh stuff, and then there is a community in that area that would publicly talk about it, and there'll be faces, names, and so on and so forth. I didn't see women there. Many times, most of the time, it's just not there. But however, I was a little surprised that that aspect of posters was not necessarily covered here. And it was only posters that were made physically. So there was I was looking at posters of different kind to come up here, which was not there. So it was a little bit surprising. The second is posters which are made like this, which are made with paper, which are handmade, which have color in them. There is a sense of fragility in them, right? How do people who use these posters think about it? And there is another way to think about it for me is, unless and until someone has already seen the posters, taken a shot at capturing it, preserving it, archiving it, that poster gets lost, right? There is a fragility to it, unlike, let's say, something that's written, published, so on and so forth. So how do you navigate that space? And when you think about archiving, isn't this like a really strong deterrent to take this as a source of archiving? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
So, so about the first point that you raised, is it working? Yeah. There are different kinds of political posters, you're absolutely right. And usually the political posters we think about are the ones that are used for party campaigns and, election campaigns particularly, and so on and so forth. But not necessarily only for campaigning for elections, but also in other kinds of ways. And we know that the circulation of political party material comes in different forms and in different places, right? But there are, so for example, to give you one example from another body of work that I do, which is, documenting the kind of Hindutva visuality in Kerala. There are lots and lots of posters which have been done for different kinds of occasions and situations and so on and so forth and all of that. This particular talk was specific to the Zuban Archives, feminist poster archives, women's poster archives, and the exhibition, which is the second iteration of that collection that MAP has done here, right? Curated by activists and students and so on. So, perforce the kind of issues that one needs to address oneself to is that material. But I also think that given that I do that other kind of documentation because of the kind of work that I'm doing, this was very important for me, partly because, I do teach quite a lot of, courses in visual culture and so on, but I don't teach necessarily things to do with posters, but I certainly will do that now, partly because this material allows you to think about the political which is not affiliated to parties. And I think it also is, and that's why the archiving part of it becomes important, because for, let's say, a younger generation of Indians who didn't live through those protests and that kind of politics, it is important. Exhibitions of this kind are so valuable. And that's why I wanted the Zuban website page to be the first page, because I want you people to go back and look at that archive and look at the material that they have put together there. And also read what they have written about the difficulties that they have faced in, on the one hand, the excitement of getting so much material from different places, but equally the difficulty of the conditions in which these were and what it meant to put it back together. So you see, the thing is that as somebody, forget posters, but I do work with all kinds of other material in archives. My first experience of using an archive in Kerala, I went back home in deep depression because the file that I had opened had crumpled in my hands. Nobody else will ever see this again, and I have destroyed this bit of history forever for the rest of the world. So, in India, you will find that we live in a hot country. We have hot, and many parts of our country are hot and humid. So, apart from the fact of whether activists kept their material, whether they were thinking about archives as they were making them, no. When you are going to protest, you are not thinking, oh, am I going to archive this? No, it doesn't work like that. But the interesting thing is that there is an aha moment in the histories and life cycles of all political movements, where they feel, no, we should preserve this. Those discussions do happen. I'm so sorry, I have to eat a medicine. This is not to say you should not ask a question. It's an alarm for that, otherwise I forget. So the thing about archiving fragile material is that I think one has to, and I was talking, I hope to come back here to talk to people who are working in conservation and other departments here, because I've talked to art conservators and people like that. Conservation is very, very important. Now, what you have to remember is that groups, women's groups, aren't, flush with money. You need money to be able to do a lot of all of this kind of work, right? But when when you can put something together and manage to bring it to a kind of shape, and that's what I was saying, that at one point I had read somebody who had been initially involved with the collection and the setting up of the archive, who's a very interesting woman for many reasons, Jaya Bhattacharjee Rose. She had written about the experience of collection and of conservation and preservation and the kind of work that went into actually being able to archive this finally, to digitize it. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. But prior to that, there is the first step of collection, to finding out where these things are, to getting them, then to get the details of them. So, these are passion projects. You do it because you want to do it in order to have this record there, right? So.
My name is Jyotika. I'm thinking of these posters as a way of laying claim to the public space. And that space is also, that occupation of public space is also in response to and in conversation with other occupants of it. So for instance, the state, corporations, the far right. So things that these movements were working in conversation with, in response to. And I'm wondering how these posters were received on the other side, and how women's groups responded to those kinds of receptions, and how your strategies changed maybe as a response to that, and so on. So how these posters were in conversation with these larger sort of entities, and how strategies change as a result of that.
So, this is a question that is of interest to me too, and I did talk to my friend Vani from Saheli about this a little bit. I've just started conversations around some of all of this, because I was actually interested to know about, what people's responses might have been who were not part of the groups, who were not part of the women's movements or allied movements or feminists, or, what would people's responses have been? And usually that is not so easy to get a sense of, right? She had a very, very interesting story. She had a couple of anecdotes that she shared with me. We were talking very quickly because I had very little time. She was traveling. I was about to come away. I will go back and continue that conversation. And perhaps Lakshmi can add more things to this. But she had a very interesting story of several years after the film Fire came out, of taking something else to someone in Bombay. To be, they had found a copy of the Fire poster, and they took it to have it framed or something, and the person who was framing that, a Muslim man in one of the areas, she mentioned that, when I go back, I'll take down more detailed notes of these. He said, हमने तो इसके बहुत copies हमने frame किए हैं, बहुत लोगों के लिए किए हैं. Right? That is such an interesting memory. From a very unlikely source, that there are people who took those posters, right? They were not all being torn down and chucked away or whatever it is. There were people who wanted it. We don't know who those people are, but they don't necessarily have to be people who were part of groups and so on and so forth and all of that. So I think there is an interesting way in which things do reside in our memories, even if you don't have an immediate response to it. Now, the other element in your question, which is the people you're protesting against. Now, one of the things that we know right from then on is men who have said many things at different times, whether they are, in response to a protest. It doesn't have to be a poster, it just has to be a body. They have said very predictable kinds of things about, women's anger, the kind of language, it's anti-men, etc., etc. It's all very, very predictable. So none of that is very surprising. But what is interesting, I find, is that, let's say, in classroom situations now, I find young men far more open to conversations about difficult questions about, feminism and so on. And I think that kind of push hasn't come necessarily from the women's movement, but it has really come from the LGBTQI kind of pushback. So there are multiple ways in which people respond to certain kinds of things, and there is a need to keep these things alive. So I think there is a way in which there are shifting kinds of responses. They don't necessarily, I don't know how easy it will be to actually, it's worth a try, but I can also equally give you a different example from my own experience, two examples. One in which we were, soon after the demolition of the Babri Masjid, we were sitting and writing and posters, and one of our friends was helping us translate it into Urdu, and somebody was writing it. Clearly the translation wasn't correct, and those of us who went to stick it almost got chased out and beaten because it was doing the opposite. It had done the opposite of what we had intended to do. So that is a memory I will never lose, because it just shows your own naivete and lack of understanding of political context and how febrile something might be. And I think that's a self-reflexive kind of thing that we do need to have. And in another similar kind of situation, I remember in the years in which I taught in a South Delhi college, behind that was one of the post-partition resettlement areas where we went to do pamphleting and talk to people and whatever it is. And I remember old women who obviously had been through the partition at that time, this is the 90s, shouting at me saying, "Khoon ka badla khoon se," and I thought, who the hell do I think I am to go and preach to them? So you also unlearn certain things. You also unlearn how to do politics, to think about how to make a change. I'm not saying that those are not issues that shouldn't be raised, but how you speak, to whom you speak, what kinds of formats you might want to utilize, those are things we do need to, think about. So, yeah, those are, I don't know whether that...
Thank you for the talk. So I am Kusuma. Can we use posters as a corroborative evidence for other historical evidences? How is it questioning and raising the question of authenticity in the context of historical sense?
Just say a little bit more.
If we talk about authenticity, we'll raise the questions of who is the author, where is it published, and what is the reason. So how are we taking these posters and using it as an evidence to come to a point, is what my question.
I think, no, that's a great question, but I think your answer lies in your question itself, because what it tells us is that political movements have to be read and understood differently, right? Authorship and, this post-Renaissance kind of signature on paintings and, the people whom I found far more interesting are the people who were the frauds, who could copy a Van Gogh and pass it off as a Van Gogh. I find them actually really quite fascinating. I think somebody should really research them. But the idea that you should have your name, that you should have an author, you should have an artist, that's why I was asking Vani this thing of, did you have discussions before the slogan? Because and she said something interesting. She said the slogan always came first, the poster later. So, but discussions did happen, right? So I think we do need to I think the collective is authentic. It's not inauthentic. The poster reminds us of that. It reminds us that it isn't just me all the time. I think it's important to think about collectivities which are often very difficult. Because just because people have come together around an issue doesn't mean that we agree on things, which is why groups have had big fights on many things. Sometimes they've broken up. Sometimes people haven't spoken to one another. All those things happen as well. But they do, and collective pressure is actually what brings the biggest powers to their knees, right? And I think it's important to rethink the idea of authenticity and perhaps sort of detach it from this kind of way in which we are taught within, let us say, literature classrooms, that an author is the one who gives authenticity. Because after all, we do know that once a book is published, it's going to be read in any number of ways. Right? It doesn't matter what I might have intended to say. You may read it totally differently. So I think the poster, therefore, is interesting, even if we don't. I think the year is interesting because it gives you a sense of period. Not that specific year per se, but a period of a set of issues that were live in the country. Right? But if you do know the artists, great, fantastic. But that artist themselves might tell you that it was in conversation with the group that they arrived at this kind of a poster. Perhaps it was shown, then changed, any number of... So that's work that needs to be done. I'm not equipped to give you a good answer to that. Yes.
I think also, we get... as students, I think this whole idea of credibility and, bibliographies and references and so on, sometimes one tends to forget that very great pieces of art or monuments and so on are unsigned. We don't know who did the sculptures of Mahabalipuram, but that doesn't take away from their credibility. They're there, we see them, and they're part of our history. We don't know who built which temple where. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. And I think posters as also one of the outcomes of collective struggle. The collective part was really the most important characteristic of that outcome, which can be seen even in songs. There are a lot of songs of the women's movement which nobody knows, and not just the women's movement, any kind of... We don't know who is the author of those songs. There are many slogans, there are many street plays. Many of them don't have any, particular one author. The other thing which happened is everything went through a process. So what you see as the outcome is not what might have started. So even a song went through so many iterations, it could change from morning to evening. We go and sing a song at somebody says, hey, that's not rhyming, that's not sounding good, or let's add this. And by evening it's changed, it's a different song. So I think any attempt also at capturing, so same with posters, some things which didn't work, you changed it, or you just scrapped it, or you modified it. You can see many of the also many of these were just a one-time, like a custom poster. There's one only of them. Now technology has allowed us to reproduce, and they're all over the place, or kept as a digital record. But many of these were just a one-time, in a way, outflow of creativity. And it was a product of the time, of collective, inputs.
I just wanted to add to that to say that one of the things with when there's a protest and people get together to make posters, there's a kind of hesitation because initially it's like I can't draw or I can't write, and then people forget all of that, and then various people start to write in or put slogans down or draw, just because there's a certain kind of energy that protest brings.
I agree. Yeah, we'll take one last question.
Hi, I'm Shreya.
This is Sangeeta, I know her, so
Thank you so much for the interesting talk. I don't know whether you came across this in your research, but we saw the aspect of queerness and the aspect of interreligious protests and posters, but I didn't see an aspect of caste being mentioned. So was that something that was, because it was caste, so the UCs would erase it in the posters that were mentioned in the archive, or was there, because of the lack of resources, were they not able to ever make the posters, or what was the reason, basically?
In this exhibition, there weren't, let's say, posters from Maharashtra or other parts which have had very vibrant Dalit women's movements included in the collection that was exhibited. And I had asked for the images just to have a sense of that. So to that extent, that is the reason. But of course, there are posters on caste that do exist. So it wasn't a deliberate omission by any means, and it's not that they don't exist. Of course, they do exist, and a lot of material does exist, by way of songs and pamphlets, and there's a wide variety of material. Which, for example, the Pune University. Savitribai Phule University, the women's studies people have, from Sharmila's time, have been collecting, and they have a huge collection of those materials, and other people also have that, and even in Tamil Nadu and so on. So it's not for that. That wasn't and I ought to have perhaps looked for, and then I added things that I had in my collection very quickly, and so I should have looked for things that did address the question of caste, so I'm sorry about that.
I'd like to take this moment to thank Arunima for that rich deep dive into Zuban's post archive. I'd also like to thank Lakshmi and Ashisha for their walkthrough of the new digital exhibition, Half the Sky Building Feminist Solidarity, in the Saskin exhibition that is on the same floor. So if you haven't checked it out, do check it out. And also another reminder that all of our other exhibitions are free this weekend, so catch as many as you can. And last but definitely not the least, I'd like to thank the interpreters for today's conversation, Harshita and Shivam, and to all of you for being such an engaged audience and staying till the very end. Thank you.